This is the machine I'm going to be talking about today. And as you can see, it has some, those of you who know about Enigma will see it has some resemblance. It has wheels, it has a keyboard, it has a lamp board. It doesn't have a plug board, but let's leave these details for a little later. This machine is sometimes known as a Japanese Enigma because it has those similarities I mentioned to Enigma, but it's not a German-made machine, it's made by the Japanese. And it's not to be confused with another machine, which is also called the Japanese Enigma, which is the Enigma T, also known as the Tirpitz, or in Japanese characters, Terapitsu. So let's just have a quick look through an Enigma, the background of Enigma. What is an Enigma machine? Well, actually, that's not so simple, because there are something like 25, I think, Enigmas listed in this diagram, and this diagram is now known to be somewhat out of date, and more machine types are being discovered and will be added to this chart in due course. For example, there's this one here, which has got cranking handles and a printer. There's this one here, which instead of doing the letters of a standard Enigma, only does digits. There's this machine here, which has 4 wheels. The Enigma that most people know about has only 3 wheels. And this machine is a particularly interesting one because it's one of only a few that was manufactured in France during the war to Polish designs. After they'd reverse engineered how Enigma worked, they wanted some machines to work with. So they built a few and got French engineers to build a few more. And this is only one of 2 now known to remain. One of them is in the archives in the Paris Army Museum, and this one's in the Institut Józefa Piłsudskiego for Londynie, which is in Hammersmith, London. So briefly, we're going to go through this yellow range, which is standard 3-rotor Enigmas. Something a bit like this. Now, if we just have a very quick refresher into encryption systems, starting with the Caesar cipher. And supposing I have a very important message which must be kept secret, and I would just add 5 to every digit, every character. So A becomes F, B becomes G, C becomes H, and so on. So this encrypted message here now becomes F space AJWD space N roots with me. It is traditional to remove all punctuation and spaces in encrypted messages. And so just to write everything in 5-letter groups, so just to reduce the number of clues available as to what the message might have said originally. When you want to decrypt it, that's quite easy because you can just run through, if you know it's a Caesar cipher, you can just run through a number of possibilities, of which there are only 25. If you try and decrypt using a message 1, that is to say you subtract 1 from every letter in the encrypted text to see if you get a meaningful plain text. And 1 doesn't work, 2 doesn't work, I'll skip 3 and 4, and 5 magically comes up with something a bit that looks like English. Now, another way of decrypting Caesar cipher is to add together all the letters in the encrypted text, to count all the letters, I should say. And you can see here that J has many more occurrences, followed by Y's. And the English frequency, English letter frequency is known to have E at the highest, T is the next highest, I is the next highest, O is the next highest, and so on. So you can therefore fairly easily determine that J probably equals E and Y probably equals T. Thank you, Peter. In fact, the order seems to be a bit variable depending on which book you read. But my list works for E, T, and E and T anyway. Therefore, J equals E and Y equals T. Therefore, the key equals J minus E, and the key equals Y minus T, which equals 5. Quod erat demonstrandum. You can make it a bit more complicated by incrementing the key with each character. And then you've started to flatten the encryption process so that you can't now so easily say, okay, there's a clear leader in which character comes the most and which character comes the second. And the next thing to do is to do something, to have a machine which does something more complicated than just adding or subtracting series of numbers, and does a relatively random, a pseudo-random modification of each character that goes through it. So the major components of this machine are 3 wheels, a light panel, a keyboard, and a plug board. There's a rather nice plate in the lid, which, as I'm sure you can all see, is just cleaning instructions. There is a few helpful things that aren't cleaning instructions, not least of which being the alphabet along the bottom, written in letters and numbers. Note that although this is a German machine, it only has 26 letters of the alphabet. There's no A umlaut, O umlaut, or U umlaut, and there's no SZ, the character that looks a bit like a Greek beta. And here's a brief introduction as to the functioning of an Enigma using a simulation created by a colleague of mine, Ralph Simpson. You could see the 3 rotors, and once again the lamp board, the keyboard, and the plug board. Let's just hit. So I've now hit the letter A. I've now clicked on the letter A, which causes a current to start to flow from the battery. And the current flows from the battery into the A key, into the A point on the plug board, from where it happens to be switched on this occasion to the M key. And the M is then passed to the 3 rotors at the top, bounces across the reflector and comes out as an O. The O goes back into the plug board, which on this occasion has been plugged into H. And so H lights. So on this occasion, A has been encrypted to H. What I failed to point out at the beginning was when you hit a key, at least one of the rotors turns. The rightmost rotor always turns. The middle rotor turns 1 step for every 26 steps of the rightmost rotor, and the leftmost rotor steps 1 step for 26 steps of the middle rotor. That's a slight simplification, but it gives you an idea as to the number of positions these wheels can take, which is 17,576. In this simulator, the Enigma simulator that I have, you can see I've encrypted the letter AAAA, and it is encrypted to GDPB. The wheels started at position AAA, and they've ended up at AAE, because for each character I encrypted, the wheels stepped on 1 step, and the rightmost 1 stepped, and the other 2 didn't. Each rotor is effectively made of 2 parts. There's the wiring matrix in the middle, and around it there's a ring, and the ring and the wiring matrix part of the rotor can be rotated relative to each other. It doesn't actually come off, or it shouldn't actually come off as shown in this picture, but it can be positioned in one of 26 positions relative to the wiring matrix. And the significant effect of this is to the turnovers, where the wheels and where and when all the wheels step. So if I take this message here, this is a very long test message for turnover, and I set the rotors to 1, 2, and 3. Note, rotors are normally denominated in Roman characters. If I set the rotor positions to J, F, and K from left to right, and I set the rings to E, W, and R, then the encryption is this text here. If I now want to decrypt this, I reset to JFK without changing the ring settings, and I get the original encrypted text back as plain text. Now, it's in theory possible to decrypt with different settings of the keys and the rings. So JFL and EWS, where each of these has been stepped on by one, gives you all of the message except for one broken character in the middle. JFM and EWT, again, each one of these stepped on, 2 broken characters in the middle, and you can move on through 3 broken characters in the middle until you can end up with so much of the message garbled that you actually need to think a bit again about how you calculate the ring settings. That just re-emphasizes the fact that the rotors are counted in Roman. They were, and depending on the machine and the era being used, they run from all the way up to 1 to Roman 8. The static wheel on the left is called a reflector or Umkehrwalze, and there were 3 that I know about, which were imaginatively named as A, B, and C, and I have this machine set to B. Now, I would just mention that here I have, at the bottom, I have the plug board simulated. So in this case, I have B plugged as G and P plugged as S. All of this information is given to the operators on a daily basis using a coding sheet like this. Today's date being the 11th of August 2021. We have the reflector B, rotors 1, 2, and 5. The rings on those rotors are set to 14, 21, 12, and the plug board is plugged so that A goes to S, C goes to J, D goes to Z, E goes to G, and so on. The last column is not particularly cryptologically significant. It's a piece of text that's sent as part of the header, which recipients of the message can use to determine whether or not a message is actually for them, or whether they should just ignore it because they know it's for somebody else, so they don't need to go to the effort of decrypting the rest of the message. Here's a view of the plug board. In this particular case, the plug board has F plugged to M by the look of it, and O plugged to Y. You'd normally have rather more wires plugged in. Without the plug board, instead of AAAA being encrypted to GDPB, if the plug board was completely unwired, then AAAA would instead encrypt to BDZG. This is some extra math which I built into my Enigma, which is not relevant to the real machine, but it's fun to play with. It's called the index of coincidence, and that is probably a subject for another lecture, but it's basically if you've got an alphabet of a given size and you do this math on messages which you have received, where n is the size of the sample and I is the number of letters in the alphabet, so generally speaking 26, then you can do some math to determine whether or not you're looking at plain text that's been encrypted with something like a Caesar cipher or actually an encrypted text. And you can even determine what language the text may have been encrypted in. There are a couple of ways of general ways of attacking encrypted messages, one of which is the known plain text attack, in which you are prepared to take a chance on guessing part of the message, or in which you know part of the message, and the ciphertext attack, in which you have no idea as to any part of the original message. The Poles were rather good at cracking machines when they had no idea about the contents of messages. And they relied on depths, where you either encrypt the same message using different keys or 2 different messages using the same key. 2 was put to great effect when the SZ42, the Schlüssel-Zusatz 44, Lorentz machine was cracked using machines such as Colossus. And Enigma operators accidentally introduced depths of type 1, encrypting the same message using different keys by randomly selecting wheel settings and then encrypting them twice sequentially for use at the receiving end. So they would take a 3-letter wheel setting and then encrypt it at 123, 123. So you end up with a 6-letter message, and the one is effectively a depth of the other, because it's the same message, but the different keys, because the keys had stepped on while they were encrypting the first round of that part of the key. And sufficient messages of that sort allowed the determination of so-called cyclic properties. And advantage was taken of these cyclic properties for the creation of a methodology called the Płachty-Zygalskiego, the Zygalski sheets. This one's not actually dependent on that methodology, but it allows you to use the index of coincidence to determine if messages have close start positions. Various machines were created, the cyclometer Mariana-Rejewskiego, of which, as it happens, I have a rebuild, but that's the subject of another lecture. And there's also the bomber Mariana-Rejewskiego, of which I also have a rebuild. When I say rebuild, they are not mechanical machines such as shown in the previous pictures, but electronic rebuilds. Then we come to the great machine, the greatest machine of them all, you might say, which is where you have a known plain text, or a plain text which you are prepared to guess at, Wettervorhersage. This is weather forecast in German. The Wettervorhersage messages were recognized as being weather forecasts because they were coming from a point somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic and not moving, so they probably weren't flying, and they were therefore, as they weren't moving, they were probably from a ship at anchor. And you could take the ciphertext and the clear text, make this rather nice picture, plug it into a machine like this or like this, using the plug board at the back. Or indeed, for the US version, there was a similar machine created which has, you will notice that there are 3 wheels, stacks of 3 wheels in each column in this machine. And the US machine, since they were taking more interest in the German 4-rotor machines, created a machine with stacks of 4 rotors. All right, that's that out of the way. Now let's have a look at some machines which are a bit like Enigma. This machine is a fijalka, also known as a fiołek in Polish. You can see that it has rather more wheels than Enigma, 10 in total. And instead of having a plug board, it has a punched card, which is replaced on a daily basis and inserted in a slot on the right. And it has an extremely complex keyboard, on which you have up to 4 characters on each key. And those of you who can read Polish will probably notice that there are some 4 Polish characters on some of the keys. That's somewhat fewer than the official number of keys in the Polish alphabet, but I guess they considered that was enough to be able to communicate. So this machine was distributed around the Warsaw Pact. So machines come in variants such as Polish, German, Hungarian, Czech. Instead of having a lamp board, it has a plug board into which you can plug a transmitter directly. Another machine, the Neue Maschine, which is a Swiss machine. The German just means new machine. Not very imaginative, you might say. That also has rather more wheels than Enigma. In fact, it doesn't have quite as many as you think, because this pair here constitutes 1 rotor, this pair here constitutes 1 rotor, this pair here constitutes 1 rotor, and this pair here constitutes 1 rotor. So in fact, there are only 4 rotors. This is the input wheel, and this is the reflector. And each rotor is divided into 2 because effectively the rings and the rotor itself are separate. British machine, the Type X, which is somewhat similar to Enigma, and indeed is sufficiently similar to Enigma that they were able to modify some to work the same as Enigma's. And this machine, a Hebrew machine, it's basically a German Enigma, but it's had its keyboard replaced by Hebrew characters. The lamp board at the top, which you can't see on this picture, also has Hebrew characters, and the plug board runs in Hebrew as well. There are 4 characters which are in English, F, X, Y, and V, which some of us puzzled for some time over. We then discovered that it had to do with the Morse alphabet as it's implemented in Hebrew. That's going to be the subject of another talk, which I'm going to give in about a month's time, where I'm going to cover several Enigma-like machines in rather more detail, including the Japanese one, which I'm going to get into shortly. That's a simulation I have of the Hebrew Enigma. We'll say no more about that. And now we get to the Japanese machine in question. Before you understand how this machine works, let's cover a little bit about how Japanese works. In the world, there are 3 ways of writing. You can, you're obviously familiar with the Latin alphabet. There's the Greek alphabet, the Russian alphabet, or the Cyrillic alphabet, to give it its correct term, because it's used by a number of countries other than just Russia, and the Hebrew alphabet, which is a right to left alphabet. This technically is not an alphabet because there are vowels built into the characters, but that's a story for another day. Then you can have a syllabary, where every possible syllable of a language is represented by a unique character. So you tend to have 1 character per consonant and vowel. So the number of characters is the number of consonants multiplied by the number of vowels. That ends you up with a writing system that is rather bigger than an alphabet. And this is just an explanation of what I mean. I've written out all the vowels along as a column down here, A, E, I, O, U, and Y, and all the consonants along the top, B to Z, once again including Y, because Y can be used either as a vowel or as a consonant in English. So we have 21 consonants and 6 vowels, and then 6 separate vowels, and you end up with 132 syllables in total. An example of a syllabary is the Inuktitut language, spoken in Nunavut, which is one of the provinces of Canada. No, I guess it's not a province. It's I forget what the technical term is, but it's in Canada, way up north. And then we finally come to Japanese. And the Enigma machine, the Japanese machine, which we're looking at, uses this Katakana system. Now, when you are using this table, you read it from the right. So you first of all have a column of just plain vowels, and then a column of vowels integrated with the consonant K, and then the next column with the consonant S. There are some phonological modifications. So instead of having C, you have she, and instead of, for example, having tu, you have tsu, but nevertheless, you can produce this orthogonal table of these characters. So rightmost column, and then you read downwards, and then you read them from right to left. So A, I, U, E, O, ka, ki, ku, ke, ko, sa, shi, su, su, se, so on and so on. And a handy mnemonic for this is a kind samurai told Naomi how my yak ran wild, which is handy if you need to know it. Now, of the 51 characters I showed you, 20 of them can take this little double tick character as a diacritic, and these are called dakuten, and 5 of them can take this circle, the han dakuten. And these have the effect of changing certain characters by changing the consonants inbuilt within them. So ha plus dakuten becomes ba, and ha plus han dakuten becomes ha. So actually, you now have to modify the mnemonic slightly by adding the G, the Z, the D, the B and the P into this mnemonic, which isn't quite so handy anymore. If anybody watched the Olympic opening ceremony when the countries were coming in with their flags and with a leader in front who had the country name in both English and Japanese in this katakana, I noticed that Benin and Panama and Hungary all came in pretty much together, which seemed a little odd until you realize that H, B, and P are all effectively the same character, and they come in this order: Benin, Panama, Hungary. Well, not in that order, but in that group of HPP countries. There's also another character set which we won't need to know about much in this talk. It's called Hiragana. Katakana is used for foreign words and Japanese country names, and sometimes in Japanese cartoons where robots and the like will sometimes speak in their speech bubbles in katakana to try and emphasize their alienness. And hiragana is used for grammatical endings, Japanese words for which no kanji exist. Kanji is the Chinese character set which has been miniaturized and imported into Japanese, and verb endings and so on. Well, now this is a little screenshot from the Epson website, and you would be surprised at how much of this is in English. Because, for example, this blue ring here is all written in katakana, but it's actually English words that are just being converted into katakana. This one here is actual kanji, so these are the Chinese characters. And over here we have some hiragana, which is a grammatical ending on this kanji here. Now, I'm going to invite you, and it's by no means compulsory, to have a look. I'm going to take 3 minutes off, or 4 minutes or so. I've put up the syllabary here. I've written down 5 characters from that Epson, 5 strings from that Epson website. Note that there are some characters which are very similar to each other. So the N character and the So character are quite similar. So and N. And also there are 2 other characters which are quite similar, which are she, oops, well, and there's another character which is also looks a bit like she, but in fact, it doesn't appear in any of this text. So I'll just do the first one. We have this square box here, which is actually a symbol for a mouth, as well as being the character ro. Then we have this character here, which is up here, which is gu. So gu is derived from ku plus the dakuten. And then we have the simple character I, and then we have an N. So that just says ro gu in, which just means login. So I'm going to take that one off the list. And I'm just going to suggest for maybe 5 minutes, it might be fun for you. You might hate it. You might just go get a cup of tea. But if you would like to pick one of these and just try and analyze it down to the basic characters, they're all in English. This hyphen here, you needn't worry too much about. It just stretches the vowel of the preceding character, but you don't have to worry about that too much. If you already read Katakana, then you are welcome to pick one and just put the translation up in the chat for encourager les autres. Or if you'd like to just have a go, that'd be great. And I'll be back in approximately 5 minutes. Okay, I'm back. And I see I don't seem to have had any takers. So I'll just run through numbers 2 to 5 just quickly. Number 2 says, oh, hello. Two people have given me password, which was exactly the one I was about to say. Thank you very much. Pasuwardo, indeed, yes. The next one is Saporto. The next one is Downloado, download. And the last one is Purinta, which is a pretty easy one to get because Epson, of course, is well known for their printers. Okay, thank you kindly, everybody. Arigato gozaimashita. And let's move on. Idiograms, I mentioned them briefly. Japanese kanji, ancient Egyptian has them as well. It was with some amusement that I discovered that someone's translated the Tale of Peter Rabbit into ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, excuse me. And of course, English has what are effectively ideograms. So, or 1, 2, 3, pi, heart, and so on. And the thing about these ideograms is they tend to mean much the same in all the languages that use them, even if they sound completely different. So 1, 2, 3 is quite different in French, and it's quite different in German and so on. This is my falling apart copy of a kanji book. And what's interesting is that a given kanji, of which this entire column on the left is a sample, can be pronounced or read as the same pair of kana. So this one says K, and this one says K, and this one says K, and this one says, as it happens, gay. And then we have a few more Ks and so on. And it makes it rather interesting that if you've got a typewriter or an encryption system that can only use kana, then it's very hard to determine what the original kanji means, because although you can go from kanji to kana, it's quite hard to reverse the kana back into kanji. And there's roughly 2.5 pages of this K kana. And you notice that it can mean all sorts of different things like 10 million billion, or a view out of the window, or longing and wails and shadows and reflections and so on. And that is because it isn't actually used as a kana typewriter for sending Japanese, at least I assume that is the case, but it's actually used to transmit kana characters from a code book. So you would have a specific code book which would convert important military words into kana, and you would use an encryption system for transmitting those. A picture is worth more than 10 billion words. I'm sure it is so, yes. And this is just an example of the grade 6 kanji. This is grade 6 is fairly high up. When I was working in Japan for a while, I just about managed to get to grade 1, which is something like I don't know, a 10-year-old or something, 10-year-old child. But that's enough to get you around the Tokyo metro system. So this is the machine I'm going to start talking about more specifically. I mentioned there were 50 odd characters, and you'll notice there's only 25 odd keys and 25 odd things that can be displayed on here. These two keys here are shift characters. So you can see this character here. Let's just go to the next page. This is the kanji for up, and this is the kanji for down. So it's pretty obvious then that this is upper shift and this is lower shift. And the machine is currently set in a lower shift because this character here matches this character here, this character here matches this character here, and so on. When you operate the upper shift, I'm assuming that a different set of characters appear in the window. But I haven't actually been able to play with the machine to determine that, but that is my assumption. And I know there's somebody on this call who may or may not be able to confirm that assumption in due course. There are two keys here. Oh. Second row doesn't seem to match. The second row matches, but but the thing is, there are two rows here, so, and there's three rows on the keyboard. So when you go from this character, which is just here, to the next row on the keyboard, then you're down here. So the 25 keys here have been mapped onto two lines, even though they're on three lines on the keyboard. I hope that answers that comment. Okay, thank you. Now there are two keys here which mysteriously have 0 and 1 on them. And I have assumed, although I've subsequently discovered that I'm not quite accurate, but I am assuming for the purposes of this demonstration, which I'm going to run up, that the 0 can be used as the little circle that goes above some of the syllables, and the 1 can be used for the double tick diacritic for some of the circles. So in other words, for some of the characters. So in other words, this is used to convert ha into pa, and this will be used to convert ha to ba. Now, rings. I noticed that the machine has these little pointers which point to certain characters, certain different characters on the rotors. And I'm again making an assumption that you can move this relative to this to change the ring settings within the wheels. That's basically what I just said. So ha is going to be, pa is going to be ha with a 0, and ba is going to be ha with a 1. What was I going to say about this? Yes, this is just a general display of my simulator, again with the 25 character lamp board. I've permitted myself a bit of a cheat here because I put in the Romaji or Latin letter versions as well, just to help me along with when I'm using the machine. Down here, you'll see there's Morse. And Morse in Japanese is rather interesting because you've got 50 odd characters instead of just the handy 26 of Latin. And that means you need rather more Morse characters. And an example of some of them is this. So you see that A, instead of just being dit da in standard Latin Morse, is now da da dit da da. And I, for some reason, has now become dit da. And U, as it happens, is the same as Latin U, but E is immensely long. And I imagine this is because it once again represents the frequency of each of the characters as they appear, at least in plain text. So they use the shortest characters for that purpose. You'll notice that some of them are quite long because ka can be mutated into ga, so you end up with ka, and then 2 extra dots to indicate the one, or to indicate this diacritic. So now I'm going to translate. I'm going to translate one of the challenges from the that I gave you earlier. I'm going to quickly encrypt it and then decrypt it as a demo. So I have to stop my share. So the wheels on this machine are all set to the 0 position, position 1, as they're actually marked on the official wheels. And let us start by encrypting rogu in. So I start with ro, and I look for the ro character on the keyboard, and it's here. It's an uppercase character. So the first thing I have to do is select upper shift. Then I fire off the ro. And the ro has been encrypted to the Japanese character o, the single vowel o. Then gu. Now gu's tricky because gu is ku plus a diacritic. So I'm going to send them as separate characters. Here is ku. It's a lower shift on the keyboard. So I switch to lower shift and then hit ku. And that translates to yo. Then I have to send the diacritic, which I do by using one of these two keys. And this is an upper shift character again. So now I send the 1 and I get a ro. Almost last but not least, I need to encrypt the I character, which is here, lowercase. And then finally the N, which conveniently is still lower shift, so I don't have to do the shift again. So that now gives me O Yo Ro Shi Ri as the encrypted version. Note that the original 4-character text has been transliterated or encrypted as 5 characters. If I now reset the wheels to their start positions, just like on standard Enigma, and type in the encrypted message, I should get the original plain text back. And if I don't, it's because I fumbled when I type in the encrypted message. So just put the wheels back to the beginning. Splendid. So now I need to decrypt the O character. Now the O character was uppercase when I sent it, and it stays uppercase. So uppercase encrypts to uppercase and lowercase encrypts to lowercase. It's just here, upper shift, O. Translates it back to ro, which is promising because that's the first syllable of log. Next, I have to do this yo character, which is lowercase. That's given me ku. Now I have to decrypt this ro character, uppercase. And that's given me the 1 back. So the person transcribing this message knows that they have to take their ku and they have to add the diacritic to make it into a gu. And finally, the n, which is also a lower shift. Line 2. Yes, I now have to decrypt this ri, which is just here, lowercase still. And in fact, I got the wrong character because I was in upper shift, but there you go. Trust me, if I'd remembered to do the lowercase shift, then it would have come out as an N. So that completes the presentation. Domo arigatou gozaimashita, and various other versions of thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Or if there are any comments for that matter. So as far as I can tell, you can unmute yourself. The security settings are such that participants are allowed to unmute, or you can put questions in the chat. And here comes one now. Why is the encryption in Katakana rather than Hiragana? Now, that's an interesting question. And I have to say, I don't know, because Katakana, I guess Hiragana is rather more cursive, shall we say, than Katakana. So it might be easier to print or read or so on in a hurry. But I don't know why they would choose to use Hiragana. As you say, it's used for spelling out kanji, and it's also used in standard sentences when you are adding grammatical endings and so on to kanji? So the answer is, I don't know. There's a number of Japanese machines similar to this one, and they all seem to use katakana. Professor Christensen, do you happen to have a view on that one?
No, I don't actually. I'm not sure why they chose the katakana over the hiragana.
Okay. Yes, there are interchangeable rotors. I believe there are 8 from which you select 4, because I have seen pictures of machines which have 4 rotors installed and another 4 rotors in a storage box. Well, that appears to be it. As there's no more, if there are no more questions, then I guess we can. Oh, who used the machine? Who used the machine? The Japanese used the machine. Or are you asking, like, was it the Army or the Navy or the Air Force? And that's a question I don't know.
Do you know the time frame it was being used, Jerry?
That's a good question. Not within my technical remit. I wonder if I could once again pass that question to the Northern Kentucky University representative.
I'm afraid I don't have the answer. The documents I've seen just briefly describe the machine and don't seem to describe its use or the time frame.
Thank you. Arigato. So let me tell you about some upcoming lectures in the near future. Just next week, I think it is, we have a lecture about CERN in Switzerland, or possibly France. It's the only scientific installation I'm aware of that has required me to carry my passport with me and go through passport control. Later in the month, we have a speaker from, I believe he's Greek originally, but now he's based in Amsterdam, Cryptomachina DE59. A few days after that, we have a lecture about the Elliott 803 from one of our very own volunteers. And finally, I'm back again on September the 8th, when I'm going to talk about 4 or more interesting Enigma-like crypto machines, where the value of 4 is somewhat not exactly 4. It's probably going to be about 7. I decide if they're interesting or not, and I also set the parameters whether or not they're Enigma-like. I will be covering this Japanese machine in somewhat less detail this time around, and also talk about some other machines which are sort of vaguely Enigma-like. Like, for example, the Hebrew machine, which I've been having a bit of fun with the simulator of. I don't have access to one themselves, as they're all locked up in the army storage in Jerusalem. And with that, I think I'll close the call. And those of you who want to have your dinner can do so. And those of you who had lunch can go have a coffee or whatever you do. Thank you very much.
Yes, Jerry, thanks.
You're welcome.